Remember when WrestleMania used to feel like the biggest thing on the planet? Even if you hadn't watched wrestling all year, when WrestleMania season came around, something in the air just felt different. You'd mark the date on your calendar, you'd call your friends, get the snacks, throw a house party, and it felt like an actual festival. It felt like a celebration of pro wrestling. But here's the irony. Today, WWE's production budgets are bigger than ever. The wrestlers are more athletic. And yet, that feeling that made WrestleMania special is nowhere to be found. The special touch that made it the Super Bowl of wrestling. The magic that made it the biggest wrestling show of the year. The aura that made WWE the centerpiece of the entire world's attention for one night. It's gone. I mean, just ask yourself, when was the last time you couldn't sleep the night before Mania because you were that excited? Apart from Mania 40, there's been barely any WrestleMania in the last decade that made it feel like the showcase of immortals. And as someone who's been watching wrestling for 3 decades, I've identified 4 key reasons why WrestleMania has lost its magic. The biggest factor that stripped WrestleMania's special touch is what I like to call the endgame feel. Because WrestleMania wasn't just any other show, it was the destination. Every single week of Raw, every SmackDown, every show from Royal Rumble to Elimination Chamber, all of it was pointing at one thing. WrestleMania was the finish line. It was the climax of a story that had been building for months, sometimes an entire year, and that's what made it feel irreplaceable. Think about Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker at WrestleMania 26. HBK had put his career on the line. One loss, and he was done forever. You couldn't get that story anywhere else. Not on Raw the next Monday. Not on SmackDown. Not at the next pay-per-view. You had to watch WrestleMania because that was the only place that story was ever going to end. Wrestling at its best works exactly like a movie. You spend 2 hours getting invested in the characters, learning what they want, understanding what they're afraid to lose, and all of this builds to the climax. WrestleMania used to be that climax. It was the final act of a year-long movie that the entire roster was performing together. But somewhere along the way, that formula got quietly abandoned. Now you tune into WrestleMania and you're watching matches that could have happened at any other show on the calendar. Rhea Ripley versus Jade Cargill is a fine match, but you could put that on Elimination Chamber, on Backlash, on a random episode of SmackDown, and nothing would feel missing. Liv Morgan could challenge for the Women's World title on any other show, and it wouldn't change a thing. There's no story underneath it demanding that this specific match happen at this specific moment. It's just 2 talented wrestlers in a ring at a big show. Back then, you had to earn your spot on a Mania card. Not every mid-carder or jobber could get on it. It was the biggest show of the year. Only the best stories, the best feuds, the biggest matches got to be on that card. But today, thanks to the 2-night format, the Mania card gets filled with random matches that could have happened on any B-tier show. And that distinction, as small as it sounds, is everything. But there's another layer to this, because WrestleMania didn't just lose its stories, it lost its soul. And that soul had a name. For over 2 decades, The Undertaker's undefeated streak was WrestleMania. It didn't matter what else was on the card. It didn't matter if the world title match was compelling or the undercard felt thin. Because somewhere on that card, The Undertaker was walking through that curtain and you knew that the most sacred record in wrestling was on the line. The streak was a gravity that pulled everything else toward it. It gave the show weight that no production budget could manufacture, and no corporate strategy could replicate. When Brock Lesnar ended it at WrestleMania 30, the silence in that arena wasn't just shock, it was grief. And looking back now, it feels like something else ended that night too. Because WrestleMania has been searching for that feeling ever since and never quite found it. They had a glimpse of it at WrestleMania 40 when Cody Rhodes finally finished his story, and for one night it genuinely felt like the old magic was back. But that was one match, one moment, built on 2 years of storytelling that the current creative team has already moved past. Without that gravitational center, without feuds that demand resolution, without stories that make WrestleMania the only place they can end, the show becomes just another pay-per-view with a bigger stage, and no amount of pyro or lighting can fix that. Which brings us to the second and most frustrating problem. At its absolute core, professional wrestling is a simple story of a battle between good and bad. There's a good guy, there's a bad guy, and they have a match to settle the score. The bad guy might target the good guy's family, attack his wife, injure his father-in-law, and the good guy wants to make the bad guy pay in the worst way possible. You don't need a history lesson to understand that feud. You could feel it in your stomach. The bad guy could be a corporate champion with the boss's backing and the entire corporation on his side. The good guy is the common man the system tries to bury, but he refuses to stay down. Their hatred, their motivations, their personal desires lead to a match where the better man prevails. That's the simple formula of professional wrestling. And when it's executed properly, it's more emotionally gripping than anything Hollywood can produce on a $200 million budget. WrestleMania used to be filled with stories like that reaching their breaking point. Someone wanted revenge on the brother who betrayed them. Someone was trying to escape the shadow of a former mentor. Someone was fighting back against a system designed to keep them down, and every single one of those stories made you pick a side, made you invest emotionally, made you need to know how it ended. The characters had backstories, they had weaknesses, they had something to win, and they had something to lose that wasn't just a title belt. But look at today's roster and ask yourself honestly, what does anyone actually want? What are they afraid of losing? What wound are they carrying into that ring on WrestleMania night? Because in 2026, the answer for almost everyone is the same. They want to prove they're the best wrestler. They want to prove nobody can do what they do. They want the championship because championships are what wrestlers want. That's the whole character. And here's what this makes it even more frustrating. In 2026, WWE is hell-bent on destroying kayfabe. Everyone knows wrestling is a performance. They know these people are colleagues backstage, that they train together, that they're following a script. So if you're not going to give them something real to believe in, if you're not going to create characters with emotional depth, then you've taken away the last thing that made suspension of disbelief worth the effort. Athletic excellence and being good in the ring alone are not enough. People don't cry at gymnastics competitions. They cry at wrestling because the story told them to. Now here's what's even more baffling. The man in charge of creative today is Triple H. This is a man who has personally been involved in some of the greatest character-driven storylines in WrestleMania history, be it his feud against Undertaker, be it WrestleMania 16 as the heel champion, be it WrestleMania 21 against Batista. He knows the importance of character work. He knows the importance of telling good stories. So why is he getting it so wrong on the biggest stage of them all? Why does the WrestleMania card feel so dry even when he had an entire year to build it? This leads us right to the third factor that has ruined WrestleMania. Say whatever you want about Vince McMahon, but the man understood one thing that Triple H has completely abandoned. Wrestling had to remain accessible. It had to belong to the family sitting in the mid-tier seats as much as it belonged to the celebrities in the front row. Vince could be ruthless, egotistical, and completely out of touch in 100 different ways. But he never looked at the ring itself and saw a billboard. He never looked at a world championship match and thought about which sponsor could be written into the stipulation. Whatever his flaws, he protected the integrity of the ring because he understood that once fans stopped believing the ring was sacred, you couldn't get that belief back. That understanding is completely gone now. TKO's entire relationship with WrestleMania can be summarized in one word: greed. Every decision made around the show exists to extract maximum revenue from a fanbase that built this company with decades of loyalty. Ticket prices for floor seats that would have cost a working family a few $100s a decade ago now run into the tens of thousands. VIP packages now cost more than most people's monthly rent. And instead of shame, you get Triple H at the post-show press conference bragging about gate records. And don't even get me started on the whole Saudi situation. WrestleMania going to Saudi tells you exactly what TKO prioritizes when they have to make a choice between creative integrity and a large enough check. And then there's what's happening inside the arena itself. Every surface is a sponsorship opportunity now. The mat is covered in logos. The Money in the Bank briefcase itself has a Cash App sticker. You can't watch 30 seconds of the show without being bombarded with ads. The immersion is shattered constantly and deliberately because the immersion is worth less to TKO than the sponsorship check. What you're left with is something that looks like a wrestling show but feels like a 3-hour commercial that occasionally has matches in it. And when WrestleMania itself, the one night that was supposed to be above all of that, starts to feel sanitized and corporate, you've lost the last thing that made it worth defending. It used to feel like a spectacle that existed outside of ordinary life for one extraordinary night. Now it feels more like a Disney production and less like a wrestling show, which leads us to the final and most crucial piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about the dream matches. Cena vs. The Rock in 2012 felt like the biggest thing on the planet. Rock vs. Hogan at Mania 18 felt like a clash of generations. Kurt Angle vs. Shawn Michaels felt like magic. But today's Mania card barely has any dream matches or any match you haven't already seen. The Streak, the Money in the Bank ladder match, these were Mania exclusives that gave the show its unique identity. But it doesn't stop there. Because here's one of the great ironies of modern WWE. They have spent more money, hired more staff, invested in better cameras, sharper graphics, and more elaborate lighting rigs than ever before. The production value of WrestleMania in 2026 is objectively superior to anything Vince McMahon put on television in 1998. And yet somehow, it feels cheaper. It feels less special. How does that happen? How do you spend more and get less? The answer is novelty, or more specifically, the complete destruction of it. Back in the day, WrestleMania wasn't just the biggest show of the year, it was genuinely unlike anything else on the calendar. Every pay-per-view had its own identity, its own unique stage design, its own atmosphere that told you exactly what kind of show you were watching. Survivor Series felt different from Royal Rumble, No Mercy felt different from Armageddon, and WrestleMania felt different from all of them combined. When that WrestleMania set hit your screen, you knew immediately that you were somewhere else, somewhere bigger, somewhere that only existed once a year. That contrast was everything. When every other show is smaller, the biggest show feels massive. Now count how many stadium shows WWE runs in a single calendar year. WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Royal Rumble, the foreign shows. They are all stadium-scale events now, all produced with the same high-gloss polish, all lit the same way, all having the same visual identity. By the time WrestleMania arrives, your eyes have already seen 5 shows that looked almost identical. The novelty is gone before the event even begins. And it doesn't stop there. Turn on a random episode of Raw and then watch WrestleMania highlights from the same year. The lighting is similar, the overall visual texture of the show is barely distinguishable. Back in the day, Raw used to look like Raw, SmackDown used to look like SmackDown, WrestleMania used to look like nothing else on earth. Today, every show looks the same. The saddest part of all of this is that WWE actually has every single tool they would need to fix it. It has the roster, it has the budget. The Netflix deal gives them a global audience that Vince McMahon could only have dreamed of. Triple H can still make WrestleMania 42 one of the best wrestling shows of all time. The question is, will he deliver or will he keep up his track record of disappointments?